Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi there, Herman and Corn. So one more question about drug metabolism for those of us taking medications every day. I mentioned that I have been taking Vyvanse for a number of years, and I know a few of my friends take the drug as well. And I was mentioning, we talk about medication sometimes with friends. What are you on? What do you take? Do you find it helps? What dosage, may I ask? I'm actually on the full 70 milligrams of Vyvanse, and I told my friend that, and she asked me how I seem calm and not like I'm running around in circles all the time. And I said, well, maybe this is just a pause, and I am actually running around in circles. But I found that it took this 70 milligram dose, which is the highest adult dose, to get the full effect. At 50, it was almost there, but not quite there. I was still having my afternoon coffee or two, which is exactly what I was trying to move away from, getting ADHD medicated properly. So my doctor didn't seem too nonplussed at all or act in any way concerned or surprised. So, because I guess I was thinking, wow, the maximum dose, how many people are actually on the maximum dose? But there are other drugs that I mentioned that I took Seroquel for sleep, and I find that drug a real heavy hitter. Even a small amount like 20 milligrams makes me very groggy the next day. And I have one friend who also takes it and takes 100, and that barely touches her insomnia. So Herman and Corn, what I'm saying here is that our reactions to the same drugs seem to be very paradoxical and unique, even accounting for factors like gender, weight, and predicted concentration of the drug. It seems that we can't necessarily. It's a bit of a lottery. It might take me 70 milligrams, and I might even find that's not enough. But the regulator sets it at that cap. And another person might find that they can't make a dosage small enough, and they have to go to a compounding pharmacy. So, what accounts for this strange diversity that we see in how people react to the drugs that they take? I've heard about stuff like profiling your biochemistry, and that it might be potentially useful specifically in the context of treating depression, where people often have to go through this very lengthy trial and error process on different SSRIs before finding the one that works. And the idea was, if we can actually profile their blood chemistry and the enzymes that process these drugs, we might be able to take the randomness out of the process and save a whole bunch of time in these fruitless drug trials that can be really annoying for everyone involved, doctors and patients. No one wants to go around in circles for 6 months only to finally find the right one. Delays treatment. So Herman and Corn, my question for you is this, because I think it brings us into the question of personalized medicine, and raises a question about safety as well. And that's the reason I mentioned the maximum dose, because I don't think I've ever been on the maximum dose of anything before. And I mentioned that that's what the regulator sets. So when we have this process of drug regulation that we're trying to look at safety, how do we account for individual variability? And are we moving towards a model, and can the current way we distribute drugs even support a model of really personalized medicine? By that I mean, currently we have a drug like omeprazole, let's say, and we produce 40 milligrams, 20, 10, and that gets licensed and produced. But if someone's trying to taper on or off the medicine or needs 25, they're mostly out of luck and back to relying upon compounding pharmacies and all sorts of complicated and strange things to get those in between Goldilocks dosages, as you might call them. But for distribution, it makes it, I'm sure, a lot easier if we know that we ship exactly these dosages. This is in stock. This is what the doctor can prescribe. So when we're talking about the diversity of drug response, do you think we could see an era in which truly personalized medicine were feasible, in which a doctor would maybe through even measuring your blood determine that you need 27 milligrams or 30 milligrams of omeprazole and send an order to the pharmacy, and everything is compounded, that we move away from this concept of fixed dosages entirely. Herman and Corn, let's talk about the variability of response to pharmaceuticals between people. And do you think an era of fully compounded medicine could actually be a reality one day, or will it always stay this kind of side part of the pharmacy industry reserved for patients with very rare or very serious conditions requiring special formulation? Herman and Corn, over to you.
You know, Herman, I was thinking about that old saying about how every body is a temple. If that is true, then we are all built with completely different blueprints, different plumbing, and definitely different electrical systems. Yet when we get sick, the medical system often hands us the exact same set of tools to fix it. It is like trying to repair a Gothic cathedral, a mid-century modern ranch, and a high-tech skyscraper using the exact same size of Phillips head screwdriver and a single bucket of grey paint.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are hitting on one of the most persistent and frankly most scientifically outdated frustrations in modern medicine, corn. We have this industrial age mindset, a one-size-fits-all philosophy, applied to biological systems that are anything but standardized. We are living in 2026, an era where we can map a genome in hours, yet we are still largely practicing bell curve medicine.
It is a fascinating disconnect. We are in an era of hyper-personalization for everything else. My social media feed is curated by algorithms that know my coffee preferences better than I do. My running shoes are 3D printed to match the exact arch of my foot. But when I go to the pharmacy, my prescriptions feel like they're coming off an assembly line from 1955. Today's prompt from Daniel really highlights this. He was talking about his experience with medications like Vyvanse and Seroquel. He noted how he needs the maximum dose of one just to feel a baseline effect, while a tiny, almost microscopic dose of the other knocks him out for 14 hours. Meanwhile, his friends have the exact opposite experience.
That is the paradox of the bell curve, right? Drug regulation is built on the idea of the average patient. But as the saying goes, if you put one hand in a bucket of ice water and the other on a hot stove, on average your temperature is fine. In reality, you are in a lot of pain in two very different ways. For decades, the average patient used in clinical trials was a 70-kilogram white male. We have spent nearly a century calibrating the world's medicine to a demographic that represents only a fraction of the global population.
So let us really dig into this today. Why does the pharmaceutical industry stick to these fixed dosages? How much of it is a regulatory hurdle versus a manufacturing one? And are we actually moving toward a world where your doctor scans your genome and prints a pill that is exactly 27.3 milligrams just for you?
I love this topic because it forces us to look at the intersection of biology, economics, and law. To understand why we are where we are, we have to look at the liver, specifically the cytochrome P450 system or the CYP enzymes.
The workhorse of metabolism. I remember you going down a regulatory rabbit hole on this a few months ago. It is basically a family of enzymes that act as the border control for your bloodstream, right?
Exactly. Think of them as the specialized mechanics in your body's chemical processing plant. Their job is to take foreign substances, xenobiotics, which include drugs, and break them down so they can be excreted. Now, here is where the individual variability kicks in. Your genetics dictate how many of these mechanics you have, how hard they work, and even which specific tools they carry.
And this is not just a minor 5 or 10% difference, is it? We are talking about massive swings in how people process the same chemical.
Absolutely. We are talking orders of magnitude. Take the enzyme CYP2D6 as a prime example. It is responsible for processing about 25% of all clinically used drugs, including many antidepressants, antipsychotics, and even common painkillers like codeine. In the general population, we see 4 distinct categories of people. You have your poor metabolizers who have almost no enzyme activity. For them, a standard dose can be toxic because the drug just sits in their system, building up like water in a clogged sink. Then you have intermediate, normal, and finally the ultra-rapid metabolizers.
The ultra-rapid ones are the ones who feel like the medicine never even touched them, right? Like Daniel mentioned with his Vyvanse, their liver is basically a high-speed industrial shredder.
Precisely. If you are an ultra-rapid metabolizer and you take a standard dose of an antidepressant, it might be cleared from your bloodstream before it ever has a chance to reach the therapeutic threshold in your brain. To the doctor, it looks like the drug is not working, or perhaps that the patient is non-compliant. To the patient, it feels like a personal failure or a hopeless situation. But in reality, it is just a mechanical mismatch between the dose and the individual's metabolic speed. On the flip side, if you give codeine to an ultra-rapid metabolizer, their liver converts it into morphine so quickly that they can experience an overdose from a safe dose.
It seems like such a massive blind spot for a system that claims to be evidence-based. If we know these variations exist, and we have known about them for years, why isn't every prescription preceded by a genetic test? We have the technology for pharmacogenomics now. It is not like it is science fiction anymore. I can buy a DNA kit at the grocery store.
It is definitely not science fiction, but this is where we hit the regulatory and economic wall. Think about how a drug gets approved by the Food and Drug Administration or the EMA in Europe. The process is designed around proving safety and efficacy for a broad population through randomized controlled trials, or RCTs. To do that, you need to eliminate as many variables as possible.
Right, because if you allow every patient in a clinical trial to take a different customized dose, you introduce so much noise into the data that it becomes almost impossible to prove that the drug itself is what is causing the effect.
Exactly. The regulators want to see that 20 milligrams of drug X works better than a sugar pill for a group of 3,000 people. If you start saying, well, it worked for person A at 12 milligrams and person B at 45 milligrams, the statistical power of the study starts to evaporate. The p-value becomes harder to reach. So, the industry aims for the middle of the bell curve. They find the Goldilocks dose, the one that is high enough to help the majority, but low enough not to poison the majority.
So the people on the edges, the outliers like Daniel, are essentially the collateral damage of a system that prioritizes statistical certainty over individual optimization. We sacrifice the 10% at the top and the 10% at the bottom to make sure the 80% in the middle are mostly okay.
That is a harsh way to put it, but it is scientifically accurate. And then you have the manufacturing side, which is a whole other beast. The pharmaceutical industry is built on the Blockbuster Model. Making 10 million identical 20 milligram tablets is incredibly cheap. The marginal cost of the 10 millionth pill is nearly zero once the factory is set up. But if you want to produce custom doses, say a 16.4 milligram tablet, you are essentially moving back toward the era of the apothecary or the compounding pharmacy.
Which is what Daniel mentioned. He talked about how people sometimes have to go to compounding pharmacies to get those specific doses that are not available commercially. But I have looked into this. Compounding is expensive. It is often not covered by insurance, and it feels a bit like boutique medicine.
It is also much harder to regulate for quality. When a major pharmaceutical company makes a pill, there are massive multi-million-dollar quality control systems ensuring that every pill has exactly the stated amount of active ingredient. When you have a local pharmacist mixing a custom liquid or capsule, the margin for human error increases. It is much harder for a regulatory body to oversee 100,000 tiny labs than 10 massive ones. However, we are seeing a shift. In 2024 and 2025, the FDA began issuing new guidances on continuous manufacturing and point-of-care manufacturing.
That sounds like a fancy way of saying printing pills on site.
That is exactly what it is. We are moving away from the batch model where you mix a giant vat of chemicals and press them into pills. Instead, we are looking at 3D printing for pharmaceuticals. Imagine a machine in your local pharmacy, or even eventually in your home, that takes ink cartridges of various active ingredients and excipients.
Like a soda fountain, but for medicine. I can see the Coke Freestyle machine version of my blood pressure meds.
Sort of. Your doctor sends a digital prescription that specifies the exact milligram count based on your latest blood work or genetic profile. The printer assembles the pill with layers that control the release rate. Maybe you need a fast burst in the morning and a slow trickle in the afternoon. You could even combine multiple medications into one polypill tailored specifically for you. No more taking 5 different bottles of pills at different times of the day.
That would be a game changer for adherence, especially for elderly patients who are often managing 10 or more different medications. But how do we get the regulators on board with that? If the drug is now a software-defined combination, how do you test it for safety? You can't run a clinical trial on every possible combination.
That is the trillion-dollar question. The FDA has actually been surprisingly forward-thinking here. They cleared the first 3D printed drug, Spritum, years ago. Now, that one was still a standardized dose, but the printing process allowed it to be incredibly porous so it would dissolve almost instantly, vital for patients having seizures who can't swallow. The next leap, which we are seeing in pilot programs right now in 2026, is model-based regulation.
Model-based? Like a computer simulation?
Exactly. Instead of testing the specific physical pill, you test and validate the algorithm that determines the dose. You prove that the system accurately translates biological inputs, like your weight, your CYP enzyme profile, and your kidney function into safe outputs. We are seeing the rise of digital twins in medicine. The idea is that you create a highly complex computer model of a specific patient's physiology. You can then run simulations to see how they might react to a certain drug before they ever take a single milligram.
It is like a flight simulator for your liver. You crash the virtual plane 1,000 times so you don't crash the real one.
Precisely. You input the genetic data about their enzymes, their age, their other medications, even their gut microbiome, which we now know plays a huge role in drug metabolism. The model says, for this specific person, 34 milligrams is the sweet spot, 35 might cause nausea, and 33 won't be effective. This is what we call precision dosing.
It sounds incredible, but I can already hear the skeptics. This sounds like it would be incredibly expensive and only available to the ultra-wealthy. Are we creating a two-tiered medical system where the rich get precision medicine and everyone else gets the average pill that might or might not work?
That is a very real danger, Corn. But think about the history of technology. Sequencing the first human genome cost nearly $3 billion and took over a decade. Today, in 2026, you can get a comprehensive pharmacogenomic scan for under $200. As the cost of data and the cost of the hardware like 3D printers drops, the economic argument for personalization actually gets stronger, not weaker.
Because the average pill is actually incredibly expensive when you consider the waste.
You hit the nail on the head. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year on ineffective medicine. If a drug only works for 60% of the people who take it, that means 40% of the spending on that drug is essentially wasted. Not to mention the cost of hospitalizations from adverse drug reactions, which are one of the leading causes of death in the developed world. If you can use a $200 test to ensure that you only give the drug to the people it will actually help, and at the right dose, you save a massive amount of money in the long run. Insurance companies are finally starting to realize that precision is cheaper than trial and error.
It is a shift from reactive medicine to predictive medicine. But I want to go back to Daniel's point about the lottery feel of it. He mentioned antidepressants specifically, and the long, painful process of finding the right SSRI. That is such a common experience. Why is psychiatry particularly difficult for this?
Psychiatry is the frontier for this because the brain is so much more complex than, say, the circulatory system. When you take a drug for high blood pressure, we can measure the result almost instantly with a cuff. But with antidepressants, the mechanism of action is often indirect. It is not just about increasing serotonin levels. It is about the downstream effects on neuroplasticity and gene expression, which can take weeks or months to manifest.
And the variability there isn't just about how fast the liver breaks down the drug. It is about how the receptors in the brain respond to it.
Right. That is the difference between pharmacokinetics, what the body does to the drug, and pharmacodynamics, what the drug does to the body. Even if two people have the exact same level of a drug in their blood, their brains might react differently. One person's receptors might be very sensitive, while another's are downregulated or less responsive due to chronic stress or genetics. So you have variability at the entry point, the processing point, and the destination point. It is a wonder that standardized doses work as well as they do.
So, if I am a listener and I am frustrated because my meds don't seem to be working, or the side effects are too much, what are the practical takeaways here? Is there anything a patient can do right now, in 2026, to advocate for a more personalized approach?
The first thing is to ask about pharmacogenomic testing. Many doctors still don't offer it routinely because they weren't trained on it in med school 20 years ago, but it is becoming the standard of care in forward-thinking clinics. Tests like GeneSight or similar panels can look at those CYP enzymes we talked about. It won't give you a perfect yes or no answer, but it can rule out drugs that your body is genetically predisposed to struggle with. It moves you from blind guessing to informed trial and error.
That seems like a huge step. Instead of trying 10 different meds over 2 years, you might only have to try 2 over 4 months.
Exactly. Second, be very detailed with your doctor about the timing of side effects. If a drug makes you drowsy 2 hours after you take it, that tells a different story about your metabolism than if it makes you drowsy 10 hours later. Those data points are clues for a savvy clinician to adjust the dosage or the timing. We are also seeing the rise of therapeutic drug monitoring, or TDM, for more common drugs. This used to be reserved for very toxic drugs like lithium, where the line between helpful and deadly is very thin. But now, we are seeing it used for things like antidepressants and ADHD meds. You take the drug, then you get a blood test to see exactly how much is actually circulating in your system.
And I think we should also mention that maximum dose doesn't mean this is the most medicine a human can handle. It is a regulatory cap based on the average. As Daniel noted, he is on the max dose of Vyvanse and feels calm, not overstimulated. That is a clear sign his body is processing it differently than the average person the cap was designed for.
Right. And conversely, if you find that a tiny dose of something like Seroquel is too much, don't let a doctor tell you that it shouldn't be doing that at this dose. Your biochemistry is the truth. The textbook is just a map of the average. If you are a poor metabolizer, that tiny dose is effectively a massive dose for your system because it never leaves.
It really comes down to body literacy. Understanding that these numbers on the bottle are just starting points, not absolute truths. It feels like we're in this awkward transition period. We have the high-resolution maps, but we're still driving the old, clunky buses.
That is a great way to put it. We're moving toward a model where the drug is just one part of a treatment system that includes your genetic data, your real-time biometrics from your smartwatch, and an AI-driven dosing schedule. In fact, there are already AI dose optimizers in clinical trials that track your sleep, heart rate, and mood, and then suggest adjustments to your doctor.
I wonder what the pharmaceutical companies think about this. In some ways, it threatens their Blockbuster model. They want one drug they can sell to everyone. If the market becomes fragmented into thousands of tiny sub-niches, does the business model still work?
It has to evolve. We are seeing the rise of niche busters. Companies are realizing they can charge a premium for a drug that is guaranteed to work for a specific genetic subgroup, rather than a cheaper drug that is a coin flip. It is a shift in value. You aren't paying for the chemical, you are paying for the outcome. This is the value-based healthcare movement. If the result is patient is no longer depressed, the provider gets paid. That incentivizes the provider to use whatever tools like genetic testing or custom compounding are necessary to get that result as quickly as possible.
It is a massive shift in the philosophy of medicine, from treating the disease to treating the patient who has the disease. It sounds like a cliché, but we are finally getting the technical tools to actually do it.
We really are. And while the regulatory hurdles are real, they aren't insurmountable. The regulators are just as frustrated by the limitations of the current system. There is a lot of internal pressure at places like the FDA to modernize. They know that the one-size-fits-all model is holding back the next generation of cures.
I'm curious about the role of AI in the closed-loop systems you mentioned. We already see this with insulin pumps for diabetics, right? The sensor measures blood sugar, and the pump adjusts the insulin dose in real time. Why can't we do that for everything?
We are getting there. There is research into smart implants that can release precise amounts of medication based on real-time chemical sensors in the blood. Imagine a smart blood pressure implant that detects a spike in cortisol or adrenaline and releases just enough beta blocker to compensate. Or an ADHD patch that adjusts the release of stimulant based on your focus levels and heart rate. The potential for reducing addiction and overprescription is huge. If the system only gives you exactly what you need at that moment, you don't have these massive spikes and crashes that lead to dependency.
It's a lot to take in. It makes you realize how brute force our current medical system really is. We are basically throwing chemical rocks at a very delicate glass sculpture and hoping we only hit the dust on the surface.
Haha, that is a vivid image, Corn. But yes, we are moving toward lasers instead of rocks. It will take time, and it will be expensive at first, and there will be plenty of mistakes along the way. But the direction is clear. The standard dose is a relic of the industrial age, and its days are numbered.
I hope so. For the sake of everyone who has ever felt like a failed patient because they didn't fit the average. Thanks for diving into this with me, Herman. I feel like I understand my own plumbing a little better now.
Any time. It is a fascinating world inside us.
And thanks to Daniel for the prompt. It's a topic that touches almost everyone at some point, whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, I just want to say to our listeners, if you are finding these deep dives helpful, please take a moment to leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really helps the show find its way to more curious minds like yours.
Yeah, we genuinely appreciate the support. It's what keeps us digging into these weird and wonderful topics every week.
You can find all our past episodes. We've got over 600 of them now at myweirdprompts.com. There is an RSS feed there for subscribers and a contact form if you want to send us your own thoughts or questions.
You can also reach us directly at show@myweirdprompts.com. We love hearing from you, even if it's just to tell us about your own weird metabolic quirks.
This has been My Weird Prompts. I'm Herman Poppleberry.
And I'm Corn. We'll be back next time with another dive into whatever is on Daniel's mind. Until then, stay curious.
Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.